Hi, this is Kath Gavin. I just wanted to share with you something that I studied last week, 2 Timothy chapter 1. It's an emotional chapter. In verse 2, Paul calls Timothy my beloved son. In verses 3 and 4, Paul tells Timothy he's been praying for him night and day and greatly desires to see him. Also in verse 4, Paul recollects Timothy's tears. I'm not sure what Timothy was in tears about. Perhaps it was the thought of Paul's upcoming martyrdom. In 2 Timothy 4:6, Paul said, "The time of my departure is at hand." Indeed, Paul was martyred by Roman Emperor Nero in 66 AD, soon after writing this letter. Perhaps Timothy's tears were sorrow mixed with fear of being imprisoned or martyred himself. In any case, Paul reminds him to stir up the gift of God which is in thee. This gift was probably the gift for teaching. Stir up means to revive a fire. My parents used to have an open fireplace with an old-fashioned iron poker. Sometimes I'd use the poker to agitate the embers and stop the fire from going out. So sometimes we need to agitate our embers in a spiritual sense. Timothy's tears and fears had nearly put out his passion for ministry. In verse 7, Paul went on to encourage Timothy, "For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." Then in verse 8, he is told not to be ashamed of the gospel or of Paul himself. It seems that some were ashamed of Paul. In verse 15, Paul said, "They which are in Asia be turned away from me, of whom are Phygellus and Hermogenes." It's sad that right at the end of Paul's ministry, when alone in prison and facing martyrdom, many abandoned him. Perhaps they were fearful of meeting a similar fate to Paul if they associated with him. Thus they proved themselves to be fair weather friends. Paul was passing on his ministry to Timothy. What a weight of responsibility, especially when Timothy would be left to deal with false teachers after Paul had gone. Judaism, Gnosticism, and Greek philosophy threatened to swamp the Ephesian church. This last week, I was contemplating how Augustine's doctrine of original sin has its roots in Gnostic dualism, the teaching that our flesh is evil and our soul is saved through gnosis, or illumination. I noticed how Gnosticism grew out of Plato's theory of forms, hence original sin is really rooted in Greek philosophy. This scripture came to mind, Colossians 2:8. "Beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit, after the traditions of men, after the rudiments of the world, and not after Christ." Paul's epistles warn against philosophy. In fact, any teaching that subtly subverts the gospel by shifting the focus away from godliness and towards something else. A ship only needs to go off course by a few degrees to end up in an entirely different location. Little wonder Paul told Timothy in verses 13 and 14 to hold fast the form of sound words and to keep that good thing which was committed unto thee. Anyway, I just felt to share with you what I had studied last week for our Skype fellowship, and now I'm going to go for a swim since it's such a beautiful day here on the Sunshine Coast. I hope you all have a great week. Bye.